It was supposed to be a routine oversight hearing. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation, attorneys shuffled papers, reporters tapped at their phones, and interns whispered from the gallery. But everything shifted the moment Pam Bondi entered. She walked in with a measured stride, dressed in sharp navy, her eyes locked straight ahead. Judge Edward Chen sat elevated behind the bench, thumbing through case notes, composed, unreadable. This wasn't just another oversight. Bondi had discovered something buried deep in the judiciary's discretionary docketing system, something about how cases were selectively delayed or expedited. And now, she was ready to make it public. "Your Honor," Bondi said clearly, as she stood at the podium. "Before we proceed, I need to ask why over 40 civil rights cases, filed under similar circumstances, were all delayed under your docket, while financial litigation cases were prioritized." The room fell quiet. Chen looked up slowly, adjusting his glasses. "Ms. Bondi, that's quite a claim. Do you have evidence?" Pam didn't blink. "Yes. In fact, I have cross-referenced timestamps, clerk logs, and internal emails. The pattern is undeniable." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Judge Chen leaned back, no longer expressionless. "Ms. Bondi," he began. But his next words stopped everyone cold. Judge Chen paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. His hands folded neatly on the bench, eyes locked on Bondi, not with anger, but with a strange kind of warning. "Ms. Bondi," he said at last, his voice calm but charged, "do you understand the full scope of what you're accusing this court of?" Pam didn't waver. "I do. You're implying judicial manipulation, perhaps even misconduct, against a sitting federal judge," he said slowly. "Those are not just legal accusations. They're constitutional concerns." A wave of tension passed through the courtroom like a ripple in still water. The reporters stopped typing. The attorneys stopped breathing. Even the bailiff, who'd seen more hearings than he could count, straightened up. Chen continued, "And if you're wrong, if you've misinterpreted even one log, one timestamp, then what you're doing isn't whistleblowing. It's sedition by another name." Bondi's face remained steady, but her heart pounded. She knew the stakes. She'd spent weeks triple-checking her data. Still, the way Chen spoke made her feel like she had just stepped onto a very thin sheet of ice. Then Chen leaned forward slightly and added, almost quietly, "But if you're right, you've just exposed a chain of approvals that doesn't end with me." That line hit like a thunderclap. Gasps broke from the gallery. Chen's clerk looked visibly rattled. A federal prosecutor turned to whisper something urgently to his assistant. Pam held her ground, her jaw tightening. "Then I suggest we unseal those communications and let the truth surface." Judge Chen gave her one long, unreadable look, then reached for the red folder beside his gavel. Judge Chen opened the red folder with deliberate precision, like someone defusing a bomb. His fingers hovered over the first document, then slid it across the bench so that the clerk could deliver it to Bondi. "Since you've come prepared," Chen said coolly, "so have I." Pam accepted the document, unfolding it cautiously. It wasn't what she expected. Not denial. Not dismissal. But an internal memo, one she hadn't seen before. Her eyes scanned it rapidly. It referenced a meeting, 3 months prior. A closed-door judiciary coordination session. The memo was labeled Tier Prioritization Framework. And at the bottom was a list of names. Judge Edward Chen's was not at the top. "You're saying you weren't the final decision-maker?" Pam asked, holding up the memo. "I'm saying," Chen replied, "that what you've uncovered is the surface. You've entered a system that doesn't want sunlight. And I hope you're ready for what comes next." The courtroom had gone dead silent again. It wasn't the kind of silence that came with scandal, it was the silence that came before a storm. Pam looked back at the bench. "So you're confirming there's a coordinated filtering mechanism?" "I'm confirming," Chen said without blinking, "that you've just opened a door. And some very powerful people would prefer you hadn't." A low hum of shock moved through the spectators. Even Bondi's co-counsel leaned in with visible concern. Judge Chen leaned forward once more, this time more personal. "You want transparency, Ms. Bondi? Good. But don't expect allies once the lights come on." And with that, he turned to his clerk. "Schedule an emergency evidentiary review. I want every name listed in that memo subpoenaed by morning." The courtroom exploded with stunned chatter. Pam didn't flinch. She knew she had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Pam Bondi stood still as the courtroom erupted behind her. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but her face remained unreadable. She clutched the memo in one hand and stared at the judge, trying to gauge whether Chen was shielding himself, or trying to help her reveal something larger. Judge Chen rapped his gavel sharply. "Order. This court is not a circus." The room quieted again. He turned to the clerk. "Contact the U.S. Marshal's office. I want federal protection in place for all involved parties before the subpoenas go out. We're not risking witness coercion." That phrase, witness coercion, wasn't lost on anyone. Pam's co-counsel leaned in close. "This just went federal. You realize you've pierced the administrative layer. This wasn't supposed to happen in open court." Pam whispered back, "That's exactly why I did it here." Chen stood from the bench. "This court is now in recess until 10 a.m. tomorrow. In that time, Ms. Bondi, I suggest you prepare not just your files, but your firewall. You're going to need it." With that, he exited through the side door, flanked by two security officers who hadn't been there before. The moment the judge was gone, a crush of reporters surged toward Pam. "Do you believe Judge Chen is on your side? Who's at the top of the memo? Are you accusing a federal oversight committee of data suppression?" She raised her voice just loud enough to be heard. "You'll get your answers tomorrow. In open court. Under oath." Then she walked out, shoulders back, memo in hand. But as the marble doors closed behind her, a plainclothes man waiting near the hallway leaned toward his lapel mic and spoke softly. "She just named Tier 1. Initiate protocol." Pam never saw him. But someone else did. That night, Pam Bondi didn't go home. She didn't trust home. Instead, she checked into an unregistered suite at a secure facility used by federal witnesses and whistleblowers, her name scrubbed from the check-in, her phone left in a Faraday bag. She sat at a small desk under harsh fluorescent light, rereading the memo Judge Chen had handed her. Tier 1, Confidential Jurisprudence Coordination Group. 7 names. 6 judges. 1 civilian consultant. Some still active. Some recently retired. All powerful. She had heard whispers about Tier 1 before. A nickname in DC circles. A ghost committee that allegedly rerouted controversial dockets, burying or accelerating cases depending on influence. Until now, it was rumor. Now, it was printed in black ink. She began compiling a dossier, building timelines, matching court decisions with the appearance of names from the memo. The deeper she dug, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't about any single judge. This was a machine. Around 2 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Pam froze. No one should have known she was here. She moved to the peephole, nothing. Then, a slip of paper slid under the door. Just one sentence: "They'll burn the building before they let this reach committee." Pam's breath caught. She reached for the emergency number Judge Chen had scribbled on the back of the memo before leaving the courtroom. It rang twice. Then, "Bondi." She recognized the voice immediately. But it wasn't Chen. It was Karoline Leavitt. And her next words changed everything. "They know you're close. I have something they don't want you to find. Meet me before court." By 6 a.m., the streets of D.C. were still quiet, dimly lit, eerily still. Pam wore a plain coat and kept her hood up as she moved toward the secluded underground parking garage 2 blocks from the courthouse, just as Leavitt instructed. She spotted Karoline Leavitt near a gray SUV, dressed in all black, holding a slim leather case. Her posture was tense, but focused. "You weren't followed?" Leavitt asked without greeting. "I don't think so," Bondi replied. "What is it you have?" Leavitt opened the case. Inside was a sealed flash drive, an envelope with Department of Justice letterhead, and what looked like a handwritten memo. Pam raised her brow. "I've been tracking Tier 1 since before I left the communications director role," Karoline said. "This flash drive, it's internal scheduling data. But not just court dates. It shows whose cases were rerouted, whose appeals were frozen, even which judges were assigned intentionally to certain high-profile defendants." Pam's eyes widened. "That's exactly what I need for evidentiary backup." Karoline hesitated before handing it over. "This will make you a target. More than you already are. There's a reason even Chen didn't go public with this, until you forced his hand." Pam took the flash drive and slipped it into her inner coat pocket. "Then it's time the public sees it." Karoline nodded, but her voice dropped to a whisper. "One more thing. That civilian consultant on the Tier 1 list, he's not just a contractor." "Who is he?" Karoline looked Pam dead in the eye. "He's been advising 2 sitting senators and has direct access to the Chief Justice." Pam's breath caught. "You drop that name in open court," Karoline said, "and the balance of judicial independence could collapse in real time." Bondi stepped back. "Then I guess I better say it loud enough that it can't be buried." They exchanged no goodbyes. 30 minutes later, Pam Bondi walked through the courthouse doors. And by 9 a.m., the courtroom was already packed: journalists, federal observers, and at least one person from the Justice Department's Internal Affairs Division. Everyone was waiting. And Pam was ready. At exactly 10 a.m., the courtroom door opened and Judge Edward Chen re-entered. This time, he wasn't alone. 2 federal marshals stood posted behind him, and a third figure followed discreetly behind the bench, whispering something into Chen's ear before taking a seat in the front row. Pam Bondi sat at the plaintiff's table, the flash drive resting beside her files. She wasn't nervous anymore. She was focused. Judge Chen tapped his gavel. "This court is now back in session." The room hushed. "Ms. Bondi," he continued, "you've requested to submit supplemental evidence and present an opening statement before the evidentiary review begins." Pam rose. "Correct, Your Honor." She stepped forward, inserted the flash drive into the courtroom display system, and clicked. A diagram loaded on the screen: flowcharts, timestamps, court identifiers. Then came the email headers. Then came the case logs. Then the name. The civilian consultant. Pam looked straight at Judge Chen. "This is the Tier 1 access architect. The one coordinating judicial reassignment and docket alteration across at least 2 federal circuits." She turned to the courtroom. "His name is Calder Royce. Civilian liaison to 2 sitting senators on the Judiciary Committee. An unofficial advisor to Chief Justice Langston himself." The courtroom collectively gasped. One of the observers dropped their pen. A reporter in the front row shot to their feet before being ordered to sit by the bailiff. Someone in the back whispered, "No way." Judge Chen didn't move. His jaw clenched. Then, without speaking, he pulled a sealed envelope from his bench drawer and handed it to the clerk. The clerk opened it, looked confused, then stood and announced, "This court has received a sealed confession. From Calder Royce. Delivered this morning to Judge Chen's chambers." The silence in the room turned absolute. It wasn't just tension now, it was disbelief. Pam's hands gripped the table. She had expected retaliation. She had not expected Royce to flip himself in. Judge Chen raised his voice. "The court will recess for 15 minutes while this document is reviewed by DOJ and Internal Affairs." He looked at Bondi. "Do not leave the building." She nodded. Outside, security had doubled. But inside, everything had just detonated. 15 minutes never felt longer. Pam sat alone, the courtroom now buzzing with guarded urgency. Reporters were pulled aside. 2 DOJ officials had arrived and were already in the judge's chambers, reviewing Royce's sealed confession. Bondi stared at the screen, still frozen on the chart of judicial manipulation, every line, every arrow now evidence. When the doors reopened, Judge Chen returned, stone-faced. He sat. Adjusted his glasses. Looked out over the gallery. And spoke with the weight of an entire institution in his voice. "This court has reviewed the submitted testimony of Mr. Calder Royce," he said slowly, "and the contents are, in a word, catastrophic." Gasps again. One woman in the press section covered her mouth. Judge Chen continued, "Royce not only confirms the existence of the Tier 1 coordination group, but provides hard copies of meeting minutes, payment schedules, and back-channel communications between judiciary members and legislative offices." A stunned murmur spread. Then Chen added, "He implicates 2 current senators, names withheld for now, and at least 1 associate justice." Pam's heart jumped. She knew what that meant, the rot was deeper than anyone thought. Chen turned toward her. "Ms. Bondi, your investigation has directly triggered a formal internal review across the federal judiciary and legislative ethics panels. Your flash drive corroborated nearly every timestamp Royce referenced. That is no coincidence." Pam said nothing. She didn't need to. Judge Chen nodded once, solemnly. "For what it's worth. I believe you were never meant to find any of this." He then turned to the gallery. "This courtroom will now enter sealed proceedings, pursuant to Title 28. All non-essential personnel must vacate immediately. DOJ oversight will remain. Court officers will secure the perimeter." Chaos broke out. Bailiffs began ushering people toward the exits. Reporters shouted questions. Some tried to delay, knowing this moment was historic. As the doors shut behind the last journalist, Judge Chen looked back at Pam one last time. "You just walked into a war, Ms. Bondi." Pam replied quietly, "Then it's a good thing I didn't come alone." And from the gallery, Karoline Leavitt stepped forward, carrying a second flash drive. Karoline Leavitt walked down the center aisle like a storm in human form, calm on the outside, thunder beneath. The moment her heels echoed across the courtroom floor, even the marshals shifted their stance. Pam met her halfway and took the drive. "This one," Karoline said, "isn't about the courts. It's about who funded Tier 1 from the start." Judge Chen leaned forward. "Are you saying there was financial coordination?" Leavitt nodded. "Lobbyist shell firms. PAC pass-throughs. Undisclosed donors. Some of them foreign. All of them invisible, until now." Pam turned to the judge. "I'd like to enter this as supplemental Exhibit B under sealed review." Judge Chen didn't hesitate. "Accepted. Clerk, secure and catalog the drive immediately." The clerk moved fast. Everyone in the room sensed it, they were no longer dealing with judicial misconduct. They were staring at the edge of a constitutional breach. The screen came alive again. More documents. Internal emails from consulting firms. Wire transfers tagged under strategic influence assessments. One note caught everyone's attention: Royce confirmed Chen is contained. Priority is maintaining pressure on Bondi before committee leak. Chen's face darkened. "I've never seen this," he said quietly. "Not once. They were using my name." Pam turned to him. "That was the insurance policy. If you ever asked the wrong questions, they'd leak these notes and paint you as the architect." Karoline added, "They used your reputation as cover. Until now." Chen nodded slowly, visibly shaken. Then his tone hardened. "This is no longer a courtroom matter. It's now a matter for federal criminal prosecution and judicial review. He turned to the marshals. Contact the U.S. Attorney's Office. Secure a warrant for Royce. And place emergency review orders for all judges listed in Tier 1. The marshals moved swiftly. Then Chen looked at Pam and Leavitt. What you've done here today, you may have saved the legitimacy of the court itself. Pam didn't smile. She just said, "We're not done." An hour later, the courtroom was emptied, sealed under emergency federal order. Outside, the media frenzy exploded. Word had leaked just enough, Tier 1 exposed. News tickers ran wild. Speculation swirled. But the real details, names, files, confessions, remained locked behind federal clearance. For now. Pam Bondi stood beside Karoline Leavitt on the courthouse steps, flanked by federal protection. Neither spoke to the cameras. Not yet. Judge Chen exited moments later, surrounded by agents, not under arrest, but under watch. His role was now critical, his voice central to an investigation that stretched from chambers to Congress. Before he stepped into the waiting vehicle, he turned to Bondi and said quietly, "You didn't just break a story. You cracked the foundation they thought was untouchable." Pam nodded. "Then let's rebuild it, with sunlight." That night, Royce was taken into protective custody under sealed indictment. His testimony, already logged, implicated 2 senators, 3 judges, and multiple dark money conduits across party lines. Within 48 hours, a special congressional review was ordered. Within a week, the Chief Justice issued an unprecedented statement: "No institution is immune to shadow. But justice demands we stand in its light." Pam Bondi's name spread across headlines, not as a politician, but as a whistleblower. A disruptor of silence. And Karoline Leavitt? She returned to Washington with her clearance restored and an invitation to testify. But none of them forgot what Judge Chen said that day in court: "You just walked into a war." They had. But for once, truth won the first battle.